All right, good morning, guys. Guess you just finished up your do now question. Where does the government get its money from, and who decides how that money is spent and why? So, kind of like we've already discussed in the past, or you guys are new coming into this class, the government gets its majority of its money through collection of taxes, whether it be local taxes, state taxes, or federal taxes. And so, it gets it from a few other sources, but that's where it gets the majority of it from. And then who decides how that money is spent and why? So when we elect, whether they work for the city of Indianapolis, the state of Indiana, the federal government, when people run for certain offices like senators, congressmen, things like that, these are the people that we are saying, hey, go speak on our behalf, go speak for us, and decide how this money is spent. And so they, will decide and vote on, okay, we're going to spend this much money on this much money on this, and so on and so forth. So whatever you guys got, hopefully it's maybe some semblance of that. Just make sure you get it jotted down, about 45 sentences. So today it's going to be kind of split up into two different parts. We had a couple terms to add to our notes and kind of discuss, and then we're going to walk through step by step, very broadly, how the government creates its budget every year. Just like if I were to sit down at the kitchen table and decide, okay, I'm going to spend this much money this month, this much money this month, and whatever, the government kind of does the same thing. Said, okay, here's how much money we have, and here's roughly what we're going to spend it on. So, first term we're going to discuss is called fiscal. I'll say by the way, so you guys can see. Right next to fiscal, I have the word adjective, just letting you guys know that, hey, this is kind of like an add-on word. It's kind of describing something else. So, fiscal, relating to government money or financial matters. So if I say this is a fiscal discussion, okay, it's a discussion about money. If I say fiscal policy or fiscal law, okay, we're talking, it's a discussion, it's a policy, it's a law referring to money or relating to money. That's all it means. So anytime you hear it on the news, you hear it being discussed in an econ class, it's just a fancy word for, hey, the topic is money. So we have fiscal, and then kind of like I just alluded to, we have fiscal policy. The way a government manages the country's economy. So, fiscal policy. The way a government manages the country's, in our case, the United States' economy. So, once again, they're deciding, okay, we're going to spend this much money on this, we're going to spend this much money on this. Hey, we should charge this much money in taxes. Hey, we should, print off extra money or print off less money. Just pretty much anything within those categories. So we have fiscal policy, and the last term we're going to discuss today is something called federal budget, which we kind of already talked about. So, federal budget, a written document estimating how much the government will make and how much it's allowed to spend within a given year. Sorry, kind of a longer one there. So, a written document estimating how much the government will make and how much it's allowed to spend in a given year. So, kind of like we discussed last time. We don't know exactly how much, like if I work hourly, we don't know exactly quite how much money I'm going to make. Some weeks I work more hours than others. Some months the electric bill is higher than others, just so on and so forth. So we don't know exactly how much. We have maybe a rough estimation. So the government does things the same way. So every year they have to get together and decide, okay, here's how much we guess, or here's how much we estimate we're going to collect in taxes. Okay, here's how much we're going to spend, roughly. And so once again, the whole thing is a very educated estimation. So I'll step aside for just a second. Just got to write this down. Feel free. Then I'm going to erase it and get to the next part. So that's it for the terms. This next part is going to kind of walk you step by step as I explain what this kind of process looks like. And once again, they have to do this every single year. They sit down and decide, okay, how are we going to determine how much money we make, how much money to spend, and so on and so forth. So once again, there's a lot more that goes into it than I'm going to get into in this video. So just keep in mind that's all very broad. We're going to kind of go through it very relatively quickly. So kind of step number one, we have something known as determining. And I cannot spell. Determining priorities. So these are going to be kind of bullet points, not definitions, so just keep that in mind when you're writing. So determining priorities. You have local, usually referring to city or towns. We have state and federal agencies. Create a list of needs. So, whether it be the city of Indianapolis, the state of Indiana, and then eventually the federal government, they all basically make a list. Okay, here's kind of what we need. Here's how much money roughly we're going to need to spend on these categories. And so, obviously, each level is going to have their own spending limits. And so what this means is the state of Indiana can say, hey, oh, I want to spend $10 billion on this or $5 trillion on this, but in all reality, they know they're not going to get that much. So they are limited in how much they can spend. Because obviously this state alone is not going to collect trillions and trillions of dollars in taxes. So at each level, they kind of make their own kind of a wish list, and each city sends it up to the state level. Then each state kind of collects all these, compiles them, then eventually sends it up to the federal level. And so all these requests, they slowly go up until they reach the executive branch. So, like I said, the city of Indianapolis, state of Indiana, and so on and so forth, they make all these wish lists, and they slowly go up until they hit the federal government and then the executive branch. So that's determining priorities. Next up, we have number 2, the executive branch. And so, when we say the executive branch, we're talking about not only the president, but also his advisors, or his cabinet. And for those of you guys who don't know, hopefully you guys may discuss this a little bit in your government class if you've taken it already. President's cabinet is essentially a bunch of experts in different fields. So you'll have the Secretary of Education, you'll have the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Transportation, whatever it may be. And these are all essentially people who are should be experts in these fields. So the president doesn't know everything about everything. And so he'll ask, hey, if he has an education question, hey, Secretary of Education, what do you think about this? Or, hey, Secretary of Defense, what do you think we should do about this situation? And he'll get their input on all these different areas. And he essentially helps make those decisions once he has the information. So, executive branch will compile and makes decisions on all of the requests. And usually they dish out a little bit less money than is actually requested. Then finally, we try to, and at the end of it, once they have all these requests kind of organized and decided upon, they write up one complete budget document. So they put all the requests together, and then they decide, okay, Indiana requested $100 million. We're only going to give them $70 million, and so on and so forth for every state. And like I said, usually it's a lot less money than is actually requested. And then once it's all complete, they put all of this information, they put it all into one complete document. And when I say one document, one copy is usually a stack of papers like that thick. So that is like one budget document for that year. So it's quite extensive. So I'll step out of the way for just a second. If you guys haven't got this written down, feel free, go ahead and pause it, and then we'll move on. All right, so we have determining priorities. We have each state setting up essentially a wish list, eventually to the federal government, all the way up to the executive branch. The executive branch starts putting all those requests together and start deciding, hey, this state's going to receive this much, they're going to receive this much, and so on and so forth. So we have steps 1 and 2. Next up, step number 3. Once they have this complete budget document, it gets sent to the legislative branch. Or, once again, if you guys take in government, essentially means Congress, the Senate, the House of Representatives. So they will debate and vote on the proposed budget. So that proposed budget, remember that giant giant document that we were talking about before, and they decide, okay, here's what we like, here's what we don't like, here's what we think should be changed, here's what we think should be kept, and so on and so forth. So every year, a rough draft of this budget is due by May 15th. So every single year they have to have something, on paper. Here's, just kind of like you guys write papers, research papers or whatever. Their rough draft is due on this date every year. And then the final draft, its due date is September 15th. So it's due by September 15th of every year. So, you guys, some of you guys might know this, some of you guys might not. For those of you who don't, if a final budget is not decided upon by September 15th, or almost the final due date, there's a little bit of an extension in there, the final due date at the very last day of September, if it's not completed and still by October 1st they have still not completed a budget, then something happens. Some of you guys have experienced this in the past. This has happened in more recent years. If the government has not decided on its budget by October 1st, then the government in general is shut down. Some of you guys have heard this before. So what that means is, because the government can't decide what it's going to spend its money on for the upcoming year, that means they cannot spend any money for that upcoming year. And October 1st is the beginning of the government's new year, essentially. And so we've seen this in previous years where, hey, okay, the DMV might be closed, national parks might be closed, and you'll see on the news, oh, government shutdown. That's all talking about, it's all referring to the government not being able to decide on its budget. And, if they can't figure that out, then people who work for the government, they cannot be paid. So they can't be paid, they can't be asked to work. So, assuming everything goes according to plan, assuming they vote on the budget, they decide on it, then we have one final step. Step number 4, and there's not really bullet points to this one. It goes back up to the president. So after Congress decides, the final signature is the president's. So the president either decides to sign or veto the budget. So after the legislative branch gets done with it, they send it up to the president. They say, Mr. President, here's what we decided on. He has the power to say, okay, awesome, I agree with it, signs it, and that's the budget for the next year. Or he can decide to veto it and say, hey, I don't like this, I think we should change this, then send it back to the legislative branch for review and debate. So, kind of a lot crammed into one class period. If you guys need to break this up, feel free. But once again, if you guys have any questions, anything was unclear, feel free to shoot me a message, shoot me an email, get a hold of me, and I'll answer as quickly as I can. If not, see you guys next time.